will be um, there will be time at the end for Q&A. So I do ask, just for the sake of time, that we hold all questions until the end of our session today. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So letters of recommendation, why are they important? Who you should ask, tips for approaching them, and how to prepare them. This is just an overview of where we're headed. So let's talk about why they're important. So a strong letter of recommendation can improve the strength of your application. Letters of recommendation are one of the most important parts of your application, and be aware that even a neutral letter of recommendation can hurt your application, because the standard is typically a glowing letter, right? And so we want to make sure that you're taking every opportunity that you can to ensure that the letters of recommendation that are submitted about you are supporting your application in the best possible way. And there are some concrete things that we'll talk about in a moment. Likewise, if there are any deficiencies in your application, a great letter of recommendation can help to clarify them or minimize them to demonstrate to the admissions committee why you are a strong candidate for admission and what you can offer your program if admitted, or the field after you've earned your degree. They also demonstrate your commitment to the field of study or profession that you're applying to, right? Because, the folks writing your letters of recommendation are speaking to your strongest qualifications, and they should know you well and view you positively and be able to speak to that level, right? And so this is a great way for admissions committees to really get a sense of how serious are you about pursuing this graduate degree. And do be aware that letters of recommendation, they may be the deciding factor in your acceptance. I have seen students that were not selected for admission because they didn't have letters of recommendation that really supported their clarifying what their qualifications were to the committee. So be aware that this is a part of your application that is taken pretty seriously. Just about every single program that I can think of at SF State requires at least 2, maybe 3 letters of recommendation. That will vary depending on the program that you're applying to, but it's typically 2 to 3. So just bear that in mind, all right? So we know that they're important, right? That's why we're all here. What should we think about when we're writing a letter of recommendation? What are the things that we can do? Well, I think the first thing that we have to get clear on is who is the most appropriate person to ask. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the group this question. It's a true or false question. I want you to type your response in the chat box. The best letters of recommendation are from folks with prestigious titles. Do we think that's true or false? I'm seeing some answers populate. Oh, I'm seeing some, yep, lots of false answers. 1 true, okay, couple trues, mostly false. All right, so that is correct, it is false. Preferred letter of recommendation should be from individuals who know you well and view you positively. Ideally, they should be from either former or current professors or supervisors. The idea here is that these should be individuals that have had an evaluative relationship to you. So it's usually better to ask, an instructor who was responsible for charging you with, earning your grade, right, for the course that you've, based on the work that you've submitted, or a supervisor that would deliver a performance eval. Now, sometimes I talk with folks and, well, what if it were in a volunteer position? A supervisor in a volunteer position can also make a great option for a letter of recommendation writer, provided that they've, again, had that evaluative relationship to you. Individuals that have that evaluative relationship typically are, those letters of recommendation hold more weight, right, with the admissions committee. Ideally, these are individuals that work or teach in the field of study that you are applying to. Now, that's not always going to be an option for every student. If you have maybe work experience in a field that's not quite in the field that you're applying to, help your letter of recommendation writers by identifying what your transferable skills might be. So an example of this might be a student who maybe they've had customer service experience and they're applying to a counseling degree program. Some of those transferable skills, in a customer service role, you might be maybe you're having to listen to people's concerns, reflect back to make sure that you've checked for understanding. You're having to validate their experience. You have to engage in that active listening skills. Well, we can see that those are directly transferable to a program like counseling, right? So if it's not, if you're a letter of recommendation writer, or if your experience is not exactly in the field that you're applying to, which is very common, a lot of folks are applying to grad school to try to make a shift, right? The idea is you want to try to pull out what's relevant from your experience here. And then if we're speaking on faculty, ideally these are faculty that have evaluated your work in an upper division course, preferably in a related foundation course, right? And that might be a prerequisite. Not all programs require prerequisites, but if you're applying to the Master of Business Administration program, ideally an upper division undergrad business course would make a great option for a letter of recommendation because it's related. So these are things to think about when you're trying to figure out who you should ask for a letter of recommendation. There's always going to be scenarios for different students who they're not quite sure, who the best person is, but hopefully these guidelines can kind of at least help steer you in the right direction. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. All right, one of the things that you can do to prepare your letter of recommendation writers to write a strong letter on your behalf is to make an electronic portfolio to share with them of the items that they can reference. This strategy is a fantastic way to shape the letter that's stated about you. In this way, you can really have a lot of impact as to what will be written about you. So, write a thank you letter. Be aware that letter of recommendation writers are this is something that they're doing to support you. You want to definitely demonstrate your appreciation and also clarify why you selected them to write that letter. Prepare a spreadsheet of programs that you're applying to, when is the due date, what's the name of the program, how will the letter of recommendation be submitted. Be sure to share any program information with them, tabs with information about each program that you're applying to, mission statements about the program, application instructions, any important program details, a copy of your personal statement, and we'll go into detail on personal statements in the latter half of this workshop. But personal statements are really helpful for letter of recommendation writers because it helps them to really get a sense of, what makes you tick? Why are you motivated to earn an advanced degree in this field? And that way they can try to help mirror the message that you're sending to the admissions committee. So that is something that you want to really try to provide them, even if you don't have a final draft ready to share with them, an earlier draft is okay. Final copies obviously are preferred, but even a draft is helpful for them. Copies of your resume, unofficial transcripts, these are always great to share. I think my favorite item on this slide is the brag sheet. So if you don't like the term brag sheet, you can call it a highlights page, you can call it a focus page, but the idea behind a brag sheet is that you are specifically indicating to the admissions committee, or you're sharing it specifically to the person writing your letter what you want stated about you to the admissions committee and what you feel are the strongest qualifications you possess for admission. This is the place where you can try to help connect the dots for your letter of recommendation writer. Share any relevant work or volunteer experience, coursework, projects, transferable skills. The beautiful thing about a brag sheet is that the only two people who see this are you and the person writing your letter. The admissions committee never sees this. And in this way, you can be very direct in clarifying what you feel they could speak to, that, to purport what your qualifications are for admission in that letter. Similarly, especially if this was a faculty member, if you have copies of your projects, papers, or assignments, be sure to share them with your letter of recommendation writers. Letters of recommendation that have specific examples to draw from tend to have, letter of recommendation writers can go into more detail. They can cite specific examples of your skill sets. Anybody can make the claim that they have analytical skills, right? But where's the proof, right? If you can back that up with an example by, showing how, if a letter of recommendation writer can back that up with an example with, a class assignment, where they can go into detail about how you use your analytical skills, all of a sudden the quality of that letter elevates significantly, right? It's the same idea if you were in a job interview, right? If you're going to give an interview, and they ask for your strengths, right? It's helpful to back that up with examples of how that's true. The same goes here with your letters of recommendation. Now, if we're talking about a supervisor writing your letter of recommendation, you might want to share with them copies of your performance reviews, past projects, maybe even a copy of your job description, and maybe do them a favor, highlight any of the areas where you really excel. And from there, they can use those pieces as examples or to help start the process for writing that letter of recommendation. And then if you're applying to graduate school with San Francisco State University, just make sure that your letter of recommendation writers can receive emails from this email address here, calstateapply@liaisoncast.com. I see that we have a hand raised. I'm going to take questions at the end of the workshop. Just so that everyone is aware, there will be an opportunity to sign up at the end of the workshop to receive a copy of today's PowerPoint, as well as a recording of today's workshop and some supplemental handouts. So I'll review that during the Q&A portion of today's workshop. But this is a really helpful thing to prepare to share with your letter of recommendation writers. And here's the thing with this, the majority of these pieces of information, these are all items you can either copy and paste from the program's website or items that you're going to need for admission to your program anyway. The vast majority of programs will require a personal statement, a resume. All of our programs require your unofficial transcripts, right? So just by taking a few extra minutes to package this really nicely into an electronic portfolio, you can set your letter of recommendation writers up to be successful. And this is another thing that you can do to really shape the message that's sent about you, because now if you've taken these steps, you've shared with your letter of recommendation writers what it is that they want, that you'd like stated about you, you can create a consistent message between your resume, your personal statement, and now the letters of recommendation that were submitted. And all of a sudden, the admissions committee is going to get that consistent message. So this is something that I encourage all of you to consider creating for your letter of recommendation writers. Before we move on to personal statements, I think I might have jumped over a slide. Here we go. Tips for approaching your recommenders. Timing. You want to give them about 2 months notice, and please be mindful of busy periods, especially for referring to faculty. We want to give them enough notice so that they have time to write a strong, positive letter on your behalf. And, keep in mind, faculty, just like students, they're really busy around midterm season, finals, at the very beginning of a semester, right? So when you're thinking about asking a letter of recommendation from either supervisor or faculty member, try to keep those pieces in mind when creating your timeline. Whenever possible, you want to try to make that letter of recommendation request personal. Face-to-face is great. I know that we're still working in this hybrid modality. A lot of folks are still working from home, and so face-to-face might not make the most sense. So Zoom or a phone call is fantastic, but the idea is you want to try to have a real-time conversation with your letter of recommendation writers. And the reason for this is that it will ensure that they have an opportunity to ask you questions. And this is something you absolutely want. You want your letter of recommendation writers to ask you questions. That is so that they can get clarity and understand what are your long-term goals. How does the experience that you had either in their course or as an employee or volunteer underneath them relate to your skill sets for being successful in grad school? Timeline that, they can get clarity on any of those more logistical questions too. So in addition to that, by making this a more real-time conversation, it shows that your letter of recommendation writer, that this is something you're serious and committed to. You really want to make sure that that message is conveyed. If you're taking it seriously, if you come prepared and you set them up to be successful, they're much more likely to take it seriously and to do their best and write a really positive letter for you. Now, that said, faculty often see dozens, sometimes hundreds of students every semester. And it, this is this point is, I think, especially true for students that are seeking a letter of recommendation from someone they might not have been in touch with for some time. Some folks graduate and then maybe they need a letter of recommendation from a faculty member and they've been out of school for some time. It's up to you as the applicant to remind them of how they know you, right? So be sure to share, any relevant projects, papers, presentations, or accomplishments that you have that are related to the time that they knew you. If you took a course with them, give them the course code, the title of the course, the semester, and the year. that alone sometimes can help jog faculty memory, right? And then coupled with, sharing that, we talked about the electronic portfolio. Having samples of your work, it's going to help paint that picture for them, and they're going to be able to do a better job on your behalf. When you're asking for a letter of recommendation, I always think it's really helpful to prepare what you'll say. I talk to a lot of students who are really nervous about this part. If you write out what you're going to say, it can really help keep your nerves in check and boost your confidence as you're going about this. And I always recommend that, you go ahead and ask them, can you write a strong, positive letter on my behalf? And I encourage you to use those two words, strong and positive. And if you're sensing any hesitancy, just know that it is okay if they say no. If you're sensing any hesitancy, let them, thank them for their time and let them know that this is really critical. It's an important part of your application, and it can determine if you're admitted or not. So it's okay if you ask someone else. Sometimes someone might say no because they just don't have the time needed to put the effort required to write that strong letter on your behalf. And in that way, they've actually done you a favor, because now you can seek out someone that will be able to do that for you. So just these are a couple of different things to consider when approaching your letter of recommendation writers. So as we reviewed, once you get their support, you share with them your electronic portfolio. You can send these as email attachments or as a zip file, whichever works best in your scenario. But the idea is you set your letter of recommendation writer to be successful. Set them up. All right. So what is a personal statement? I would love to read some ideas in the chat. I'm going to ask the group, go ahead and write in the chat, what is a personal statement? How would you define a personal statement? We have one comment in here. It reflects on yourself and your goals. Absolutely. It talks about your personal experience. Yes. A brief summary of your goals and motivation. Absolutely. What makes you tick? A compelling statement on why you're pursuing your goals and experience. A brief overview of who you are, your strengths, and any work experience and or education you've got. This is exactly right. You guys are right on the money here. The idea is that this is a place where you're going to share your qualifications from a written first-person perspective with the admissions committee. It should encompass both your academic and your personal and your professional experiences, because you are a hybrid of all of those pieces, right? So it can draw from all of those areas. At the same time, know that this is, a place where the admissions committee is going to get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. And I think that there's a lot of questions about how to approach that. So let's go ahead and dive in. So personal statements are very important. Admissions committees are really seeking candidates that offer these types of traits, right? Folks that are interesting and articulate. It really doesn't matter which graduate program you pursue. At the graduate level, you will do a significant amount of writing. And your personal statement is one place where the admissions committee is really looking for students that can do that in a vivid way, in an interesting way, and be really articulate with what they're trying to convey, right? They also like candidates that are distinctive and can offer different perspectives. So sometimes I'll talk to students who are concerned that they may not be taken seriously because they may be returning to education after being out of classes for sometimes decades at a time, or maybe international students who have had very different undergraduate experiences. Keep in mind that differences are often a strength, right? And I want you to go into this knowing that, admissions committees like to admit students that can offer different perspectives in the classroom. It enriches the learning environment. Students that have different, work experiences bring a different perspective too, different cultural experiences, different personal experiences. So think about what you uniquely have to offer, and be sure to convey that in your letter, or in your personal statement. Also, your personal statement should demonstrate that you have a track record of success in your endeavors, right? So students that are prepared or ambitious, these are things that they like to see. It's okay if you've had challenges along the way, but if you're talking about challenges, you want to frame it in terms of how you came out bigger, better, stronger, and how that has prepared you, right? Another really key quality that admission committees like to see are students that care about other people. Volunteer experience, especially if you're applying to programs in like education or human services, right? They like to see students that give back to their communities, that do volunteer work, and that are generally devoted to helping others. So these are all really admirable qualities, and you might want to consider those if you're thinking about or if you're starting the process for writing your personal statement. What are some of those traits that you have? What examples in your personal, professional, or academic experience would support showcasing these traits? Those might be some things to consider. All right, so some writing considerations. Now, here's the thing. The vast majority of programs are going to have a writing prompt that you will have to respond to. These are typically posted on their admissions webpage. However, if no prompt is provided, you can consider the following questions, and you might want to consider including these even if a prompt is provided. But talk about how you became interested in the field. Was there a specific moment where you knew, hey, I want to get a more advanced degree in this field? Or was there a moment where you took a course and it really opened your eyes and you were like, wow, I really want to learn more? Likewise, it could be something where, maybe what job you want, you need the degree to help you get there. There's lots of different reasons, and that's going to look different for each student, but really take a time to consider what that looks like for you. What experiences have contributed toward your preparation for further study in this field? As we've reviewed, that can be academic, that can be personal, that can be professional, it can be volunteer experience. Experience comes in many different forms, and really try to highlight what are the most relevant pieces and related to the program that you're applying to. What are your future goals, right? How will this degree bridge the gap from where you are to where you want to be professionally or academically, right? Be sure to share that with the committee. What about your path or toward your professional academic goals is unique? I think that everybody has a story to tell, and your personal statement should be exactly that. It should be a story. And so really consider what about your journey has been unique, and how can you package that in a way that's an interesting read that also discusses your qualifications. If you are pursuing a field that is more research intensive, be sure to share what those research interests are with the committee. That can be important for a few different reasons. One, some programs like to pair students with faculty with similar research interests when they try to find departmental advising at the time of admission, so that they can kind of create that match. Also, it helps them to know, what are your ambitions, what are your goals, what are the things that really make you tick, what motivates you. And sharing research interests, if that's pertinent to the program that you're applying to, is something that you will definitely want to do in your personal statement. Some standard don'ts and do's, right? Okay, let's start with the don'ts. So we don't want to complain, we don't want to preach, and we don't want to give excuses. If you're talking about any obstacles or challenges you've encountered, you want to try to reframe them as demonstrating how you have been dedicated, how you have persevered, or what your motivation is, right? You want to generally give less space in your personal statement to challenges, and far more space to your qualifications. You really should be focusing on your qualifications when possible. Don't summarize your resume. The vast majority of programs are going to have a copy of your resume. It's usually required for admission. Resumes are fantastic for showing your experience and just kind of giving them a brief snapshot. But really, your personal statement is an opportunity for them to get a window into your soul so that they can more thoroughly understand what makes you tick, right? And how it relates to their program. Don't be general. Don't be too general. Don't say, I really enjoy helping people. Well, what do you get out of that? Why do you enjoy helping people? How is that true? What experiences do you have? What examples do you have of how that's true? If we generalize information, it leads to a flatter essay, and that's not what we want. Be sure to let your passion, your interest, and your academic ability shine. I'm also going to add personality. I think my favorite personal statements, and the ones that I find tend to be reviewed most favorably, let the student's personality shine through a little bit here. And so with that, I charge all of you to try to approach this with an air of creativity, and really allow yourself the opportunity to kind of express yourself in this essay. Consider the fact that admissions committees read dozens, sometimes hundreds of personal statements from students every admission cycle, and you want to stand out in a positive way. This is a way for an opportunity, really, for you to be more memorable to the admissions committee in a positive way, right? So you want to try to grab their attention, get their interest. We'll talk about some strategies on how to do that in a moment. But try to avoid sharing a timeline of events. First I did this, then I did this, then I did this. That will put your reader to sleep. Try to think of a creative way to tell that story, or to share your accomplishments, or frame them in a new way, right? Make sure that you do review the prompt and answer all parts of the question. The prompt that's provided, typically most prompts will give you a word or a page limit, and they will usually have specific questions or details they want you to discuss. Those are not loose guidelines. You want to consider those as concrete instructions that are required to be followed. Students that don't follow the prompt or don't adhere to the prompt, it can set a negative tone with the admissions committee, and that's not how you want your application to be reviewed. So be sure, it's a simple thing to do, but just make sure you're doing a spelling or a word check with, a word count, to make sure that you're within any word limits. Make sure you're not going beyond the page limit. You do write this in the first person. I think that that's a common question we get from folks applying to graduate school, because it is a formal document, right? You're submitting it for faculty to review on an admissions committee, and a lot of the writing that we've been trained to do has been in third person, but this is a place where you should write in first person. This is about you. You are the star of this essay. That said, I've talked about letting your passion, your interest, your personality shine, but it is also a formal academic document. So although it is written in first person and it is about you, it does need to be polished and it does need to be professional. So refrain from unprofessional language. Be sure to provide examples to support your claims. Be sure to revise and proofread along the way. One of the things that I think is really helpful, I think writing personal statements can be really challenging, because it's hard to write about ourselves, right? We have been societally trained to not boast about ourselves. And this is the place where you're supposed to do exactly that. And there's, that can be really hard to do. In addition to that challenge of just talking about ourselves in general, this can have a significant impact on your admission, right? And so there comes with extra nerves with that writing process. I think that can be hard for people. One of the things that I would encourage each and every one of you to do is to just get a good friend, someone who's a decent writer. They don't have to be an English professor necessarily, but get someone to look at your draft with you and to look at your final draft with you, and have them point out couple of things. One, be sure that you're using their support to revise and proofread your document, because I don't know about you, but when I look at the same document over and over again, especially if it's about me, I stop seeing things that are really obvious to a fresh pair of eyes, right? So be sure you get someone that's not just going to do the spelling and grammar check, but that's going to actually proofread each sentence and make sure that it flows and makes sense. The second thing that have them do is to get their perspective on your preliminary draft and say, is this a really great angle? Can you think of, it helps if this person knows you, right? Someone who knows your backstory, someone who, a good friend, ideally, right? Or a family member, someone who can really provide that other insight, someone that can say, you're talking about this experience, but what if you included this other experience that you hadn't thought about including that would help illustrate this concept a little bit better, right? Someone who knows us is going to be able to give us those details, right? So that's another strategy as well. So we've talked about some more general points on personal statements. I want to provide a couple of average examples here, and then we'll talk about some compelling examples. So this first one, after shadowing teachers in several different specialties, including mathematics education, special education, and physical education, I've realized that compassion is at the heart of teaching, regardless of what subject is being taught, right? It's an okay starting sentence. We know what we're reviewing. We have an idea of what the writer is, what they're getting at here, but it really kind of tells the reader. It doesn't really make use of a specific example to showcase that to the reader. And so in that way, this is a missed opportunity. Let's try another one. My reasons for selecting communications are threefold. My decision was gradual rather than the result of one moment. Well, my gosh, this is a huge missed opportunity. I would love to hear, what were those threefold pieces? Can they go into detail on how that was true? What did that feel like using sensory details? These are all things that would really make for a much more compelling read. Let's take a look at a couple compelling examples. It was the first Sunday of April. My siblings and I were sitting at the dinner table, giggling and spelling out words in our alphabet soup. The phone rang, and my mother answered. It was my father. He was calling from prison in Oregon. Okay, so the first couple sentences, it sounds really average, and then bam, we have another sentence that it feels very unexpected. That's one way to create interest, is to paint a picture and then give an unexpected sentence as a follow-up, right? So that is one way that might encourage the reader to want to keep on reading. Another example, during my first day working at the Motivation and Emotion Lab, I was lost. I was a tourist in a forest land armed with my psychology textbook as a guide. So we can see that they're using this idea of being a tourist and kind of navigating their way through the system, right? It offers a little bit more imagery. It has a little bit more interest to it. So these are some different examples and ideas of, how you want to push your personal statement to that next level. So we want to be compelling. What does that look like? What are some strategies? So try to use active verbs whenever you can. So active verbs, you might be familiar with these if you've ever written a resume, but instead of saying, I did this, I was at this place at this time, using the verb to be, right, is, was, were, get rid of them and replace them with active verbs. Active verbs could be anything from, led, managed, supervised, edited, taught, supported, right? These are different ways of communicating in a more elevated, in a more powerful manner. If you sign up for the workshop materials, I'll be sure to share a copy of our list of action verbs, which are really great for both resumes and personal statements. So be sure to sign up for that. At the end, I'll share the slide on how you can do that in a moment. We also find that using sensory details can be really helpful for elevating the quality of your personal statement. So, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, if you can include those details to help paint the picture of a specific moment, that can really elevate the interest level of your essay. If you have numbers available, and this is not going to be the case for everybody, but if you have numbers, it can help to quantify your experience or accomplishments when they're available. Sometimes, I'll get questions like, hey, Sarah, I don't work in finance. I'm not in banking or accounting. Like, what possible numbers could I possibly use? Well, that's going to vary based on industry and based on your experiences, right? But maybe you were with a student organization, and maybe you managed the signups for a volunteer event, right? And how many people signed up? That's a number, right? So if you're working on a team, uh, how many people were on that team? How many times a day did you do something? Frequency, that's another way to incorporate numbers. So get creative with this when you're trying to discuss your experience or accomplishments. If you have numbers to share, it's helpful to share them. You may also find it helpful to share what you learned about yourself, humanity, or the nature of your industry, or other effective approaches that you have found. I can't speak for others, but I can speak for myself personally. And I had experiences prior to applying to graduate school where I had to learn some hard lessons about myself. And going into detail on what that learning process was like and how that has prepared me for admission created a very rich essay. This is going to look different from student to student, but really consider what are some of the lessons that you've learned. Those can create a rich essay. We talked about being professional, but letting your personality shine. Try to use your wit, humor, or personal insight if you can. Try to think of your personal statement as a conversation you would have with a respected professor, right? Try to be, you want to keep that, keep their interest, but it should be professional. Try to avoid using quotations, cliches. These are things that tend to be overdone. It's helpful if you can try to put things in your own words, right? So along those same lines, you might want to consider one of these approaches. You could try to recount a time you experienced a setback, a failure, or challenge. How did that impact you, and what lessons did you learn? That might be one way to frame your essay. You could also try to describe a problem that you've solved or a problem that you would like to solve. A lot of times people get into graduate school because they see problems that they're interested in solving and they need an advanced degree to help them do that. Why is that problem significant to you? Go into detail. Was there an experience that you had where a problem that you encountered really impacted you or people around you? And what are some of the steps that you can take or did you take to solve it, right? That can also create for a really vivid essay. You can also try to discuss an accomplishment, an event, or realization that you had that served as a catalyst for your personal growth, right? So I think I kind of referenced a little bit earlier that I went and reviewed some of the lessons that I learned that did prepare me for admission to graduate school. So that might be something that you could go into as well. Personal growth can really create for a very rich essay. I love this point. Go into detail about your aha moment. What was the experience that you had where that light bulb went off and you knew, I want to go to graduate school? I want to get an advanced degree in this field. Some students, it's taking a course that opened up their perspective to a field of study that they hadn't previously considered. Other students might have had a personal experience and they realized that they saw some injustice and they want to have a personal impact. Some people, maybe you're in your, maybe you might be in a career and you know that, you're kind of stuck until you can get an advanced degree to help you either advance in your career, or maybe your purpose for going to grad school is to make a career shift. Well, what was that aha moment? When did that light bulb go off for you? What did that feel like? Going into detail on that can be something that can really help spark that creative process and frame your essay in a really vivid manner. And we talked about this before, don't tell the committee, show the committee. So in that example where we were, in the average examples, I'll go ahead and move back a couple slides. This first one here, after shadowing several teachers in several specialties, compassion is the heart of teaching. Wouldn't it be much, so this is really telling the reader, wouldn't it be much better to show an example of how that person experienced or demonstrated compassion toward a student and how that impacted them, right? You can see how that would be much more vivid by telling that story. So try to, wherever possible, to tell stories where you can. So these are some just different strategies and some different approaches you could take to try to tell a compelling a story about yourself in your personal statement. If you're interested in receiving a copy of today's workshop, which includes the Zoom recording, the PowerPoint, as well as some supplemental handouts. I did reference the action verb slide. There will also be some handouts on letters of recommendation and a worksheet on writing your personal statement that we'll share. Please complete the, you can use the QR code there. I'll also put a link in the chat here. I know it's sometimes hard to access access URLs on a screen. So I went ahead and put that in the chat. Go ahead and fill out the workshop materials request form at that URL, and I will be sharing the materials with everybody by the end of tomorrow. So you have between now and then to sign up for the materials. And with that, we are heading to the question and answer session. I want to be mindful that some folks, this is a lunch hour for a lot of people. I'm going to go ahead and just launch a poll. I will stay and answer questions until the end of the workshop, but I would love if trying to get the poll to launch. I think it's, oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, let's try this. All right, if you could share your feedback on this session, that would be really appreciated. I'm going to go ahead and transition to answering any questions that you might have. All right, so John, I see that your hand is raised. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, so there are two different things that I see on websites. I see a statement of purpose and personal statement. So the part one of my question would be, are those different? Are they combined sometimes? And then I have a part two.
Great question. The vast majority of programs typically only require one of the two. In most cases, the terms are used interchangeably, personal statement or statement of purpose. Some programs may require both. And in that case, I would refer you to the instructions with that department to see how they distinguish between the two, because I found that it tends to be a little inconsistent. But departments that require both a personal statement and a statement of purpose, usually one of them is like a writing sample where they want to see your ability to write more in an academic sense, not necessarily about you personally or about your personal journey. But if you're applying to a program that does require both, it's always a great idea to consult with the department. So I did I'm going to go ahead and share the feedback poll results. It sounds like everybody found this at least somewhat helpful, so that's great news. And then John, go ahead and share your second question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so and then part two, so speaking of like different programs, most programs have like a 2 to 4 page, which is pretty common for personal statement. Some programs at SFSU, which is the highest I've seen, it says 7-page limit or 6-page limit. Obviously, that's just the limit, but that kind of confuses me as into, do they want that many pages, or 2 to 4 is pretty common to stick with that?
Great question. Are you by chance applying to a psychology program with us?
That's exactly right.
Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about length. So I want to be really clear with everybody here. Whatever the department says is what you should follow. So if they say 500 to 750 words, which I tend to see with the business programs, that's what you want to do. If the department is giving you the space to write a 6 or 7 page essay, take advantage of that. Really make sure that you're doing yourself justice in your personal statement. If they've given you a longer page limit, I know sometimes students can be kind of worried about that. Actually, I think it's harder to write a more concise statement. So if you have that space, consider that your opportunity where you can really go into a lot of detail. And typically, if they're giving you that much space, that's something that they're typically wanting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. All right, Lauren, you have your hand raised.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. What's your question?
Yeah, so I was wondering, So you mentioned that it's best to ask for a letter of recommendation in person or face to face. Obviously, I'm not really seeing people in person or face to face. And also, like, I want to ask a supervisor that I don't work for anymore. So would you recommend, like, I will send an email and I'll just kind of like give a brief overview and then say, can we get on a call? Or like, how does that work? And what should I include in the initial email and stuff like that?
That's fantastic. Yes, that's a great point of distinction. I'm glad you asked that question. So yes, you want to try to do that. You know, if you're sending an email to try to just coordinate the time that you're going to have that real time conversation, that's fantastic. But you could just send a one paragraph email and just say, you know, I'm in, you know, if it's been a while since they've connected with you or they might not remember you, which is the case often sometimes with faculty. If it's a supervisor, they're a little bit more likely to remember you, right? But the idea is, you know, reintroduce who you are, let them know that you're applying to graduate school, what's, you know, what program at which institution, and let them know that you would be honored if they would be willing to write a letter of recommendation for you, and try to say, you know, I would love to find some time to chat with you about my goals and kind of what the program is about and what I'm hoping to do. Would you have time to meet with me for 15 or 20 minutes? And a lot of times that's all that's really needed. If they say yes, you know, great. Try to coordinate via Zoom. Zoom's great because then you can at least, you have the nonverbal feedback, right? You know, facial expressions and things like that. But even a phone call is really helpful. But just facilitating a real-time conversation, I think, is key, right? And it doesn't have to be a huge time commitment when you meet with them. If they're really chatting, it's an opportunity to catch up. Then fantastic. You know, just budget your time accordingly. But be sure to, you know, I would come to that meeting prepared with that electronic portfolio if you can, right? And if they say yes, you know, you can even reply back with those items and be like, I can go into detail with you on these when we meet, but set them up to be successful. But yes, that's a great point of distinction. It's perfectly fine to send that email to coordinate that time, but do make an effort if you can to try to have that real-time conversation. It usually pays off.
Yeah, so like I'm thinking probably in that first email, I wouldn't want to overwhelm them with too much information, right? So you're saying like one paragraph and just like I can explain more later. Is that, do you think that?
Yeah, you know, I think you have to also know your audience, right? Some people like to have that information in writing, but that's where I think the electronic portfolio really pays off, because then they have those items to reference, and you know, then you can have that real time conversation with them. I am seeing a lot of questions come through in the chat. Just because we are still a group of 90 people, I'm going to start with hands, and then later I will transition to questions that are typed in the chat. So Lauren, thank you so much for your question. Sophia, you have your hand raised.
Hi. Hello.
Hi. What's your
Hi, how are
question? Good. How are you?
It's about personal statement length. So in my case, the program I'm applying with you does not state a specific word or page limit. So I kind of assumed that's 1 to 2 pages, but I wanted to make sure what is safe to assume in this case.
I would say 1 to 2 pages is a safe assumption. A lot of times programs won't have, well, I shouldn't say a lot of times, many times programs typically do have that information on their website. It is possible though that they do have a prompt, but it's not posted to their website, and the only place you're going to see it is in the application Cal State Apply. So if you, what program or what semester of admission are you applying to? Are you applying for spring or fall?
I'm applying of a spring computer science.
Computer science is the one program I can think of that does not have one. So I would say 1 to 2 pages, and use those questions on the slide. Sign up for the workshop materials, and use those questions that I shared in the PowerPoint to kind of help you get started with that process. But yeah, I think that's a great question. I went ahead and shared the link where you can sign up for the workshop materials again in the chat if anybody missed it. All right, Tatiana, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, hi.
I want to ask a question.
So I was wondering, for the volunteer and work experience, do you have to kind of make it flow with like your whole essay topic? Like, for example, I'm a first generation college graduate, but I dropped out of high school, so I'm going more focused on that struggle and what I overcame. but my internship currently is at a senior home, which kind of correlates with my major that I'm going towards. So does it have to kind of flow all together, or?
That, I mean, it's hard to say without seeing a draft of what you have. But
Right.
I would, you know, and it's hard to know also without being able to review the prompt. I think that that's a really individual question. What I would encourage you to do is maybe share your draft with me, and just a little bit more details about your experience to me via email, and I can follow up with you one-on-one. I went ahead and put my email in the chat. It's gradadv@sfsu.edu.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate
You're very
it today.
welcome. Sure. I'm not seeing any additional hands raised, so I'm going to go ahead and transition to questions that have been asked in the chat. All right, so there's a question in here. It says, as a 49-year-old lawyer with no teaching experience, do you think that law partners are good sources of recommendations? I don't have that many options. I think that depends on I mean, you mentioned no teaching experience. I'm not sure what program that you're applying to. You know, a law partner, if maybe, I mean, that could work. Yeah. I'm not sure I'm totally understanding the full context here to be able to answer your question, but if you share some more details, that could be helpful, or if you raised your hand. All right, Dante has their hand raised. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
I don't know how long I apply. I think it's like 1 year, 1.5 years ago. How long this information is in the system, or I need to probably update that?
Every semester of like if you applied in a previous term and you were not admitted, you'll need to resubmit your documents again.
All documents.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
You're welcome. All right, Joseph, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Please. I am
Joseph, your audio is really, I can't hear you at all. I'm sorry. What's your question?
I am Joseph from Ghana, and
Okay.
I want to ask that they have when I was applying to the university last year, I was asked to provide recommendation letter, and then sometimes there are some links that you send to your lecturers so that they can recommend you. But here is the case that the lecturers sometimes don't, let's say, give the recommendation. They don't even do it. You keep reminding them, but they don't do it, and the time elapses. What are the next step that the applicant should supposed to follow? Because of that, I believe that I couldn't get the admission. And then my second thing is that.
Well, let me answer that question before you ask another question. So what you could do is if you have asked them to submit their letter of recommendation through Cal State Apply and they haven't sent it, because and I want to clarify this for everybody, when you are submitting your application in Cal State Apply, you'll put in their name and an email address, and you can send them a personal message, and you'll hit submit. And what that does is your letter of recommendation writer will get an email with your personal message, and they will have to click a link to upload your letter of recommendation to your application. You, as the applicant, you will see that something's been submitted, but you will not see what's been written. So what happens if you send it to them and they still haven't sent it? I would say first check and see if they understand how to submit the letter. I think sometimes that's confusing, and we can absolutely help your letter of recommendation writers if they're getting stuck. We also have a guide that we can share with you for you to provide with them as well. You can, if you need a copy of that, actually, I'll be sure to share that with the workshop materials email that I send out tomorrow. So that's the first step. If they stop being responsive and they're just not sending one, I would ask another person to write that letter. And if you need troubleshooting support in the Cal State Apply application, reach out to our office and we can support you with that. Okay, I'm going to take the next. I'm sorry, I'm going to go into the next question. Andrea, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and share your question.
Thank you. So my question is that I heard in the workshop right now, thank you so much for having this, that our recommendation letters, the best time marker would be about 2 months in advance. My question I also put in the chat was that I only have, I think, about a month for one of mine. Is that too short of a time? Because before in the previous times when I would give 2 months or 3 months in advance, they would think it was too much time and it would be they would forget about it, and then they wouldn't really like follow through with everything. What is the best time, and is
Time
1
frame?
month like a little
You know,
too?
1 month is still sufficient an amount of time. I would say if you're getting under 1 month, it can, especially depending on how busy that person might be, it might be considered disrespectful. But a 1 month time frame, if you start pretty soon and you ask them right away, yeah, that can absolutely work. What you might want to do, just to kind of expand on this a little bit, I think it's really helpful to give your letter of recommendation writers a preliminary deadline. So let's pretend you're applying to a program and the deadline is February 1st. There's no harm in giving them a slightly earlier deadline of January 15th, right? That way, if kind of like what Joseph was sharing, they're not following up, then you have a little bit of time to kind of, check in with them, ask them, around January 7th, the deadline is January 15th. Do you have any questions? Thank you so much for writing my letter. I'm available if anything pops up for you and you need help, or I can support you in any way with that. A lot of times, I think sometimes people forget that the deadline is happening. So it's up to you as the applicant to just keep that on their radar and just to check in with them really politely. And it can, if you have the luxury of giving them an earlier deadline than when your application is actually due, that way, if it accidentally does fall off their radar, and I'm going to emphasize accidentally because I think it's typically accidental in most cases, right? Like people are very busy, they have other things happening, and it's just the kind of thing that's easy to put on the back burner until the due date looms, right? So, just gentle reminders can be really, really helpful. But yes, 2 months is ideal. A month is absolutely still enough time. If you're getting into like the week before it's due, I would say that's probably not enough time. Great question. All right, Zoe, you have your hand raised.
Hello. So I was looking at the program that I would like to apply for, and it said that all of the application materials will be in program materials on Cal State Apply. And when I clicked on Cal State Apply, it's not open because things don't open until October 1st. Because I'm just trying to get access to the prompt for my personal statement and stuff. So I just.
Yep. So you can email the graduate coordinator in your program to see if they can share the prompt with you before the application's open. Okay. I actually learned, I was in a staff meeting this morning. It appears that the fall 2021 applications will be opening slightly early this year. Okay. They'll be opening on, I think, whatever the 24th is. I think that's this Friday. So you might not have to wait as long as October 1st, but if you're wanting a head start on that, you can try to reach out to the graduate coordinator for the program that you're applying to. I'm going to put that link in the chat here. Mm-hmm. And just send them an email and ask if they're able to share the prompt with you in advance.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. All right, Tanya, you have your hand raised.
Hi, yeah.
Hi there.
Hi. So, could I ask 2 questions?
If they're not too long, I want to make sure that we have a chance to connect with everybody. But yeah, what are your questions?
Okay. My first question is, so if I'm applying to 2 different programs, can I use the same person to write a letter of recommendation for both programs?
Yes. So yes, you can. Make sure that they slightly adapt your letters of recommendation to each program that you're applying to. Every program has a different mission statement, different values or ideologies or things that make that program unique. Make sure that the letters of recommendation speak to that. It can really hurt a student's application if, you're applying to San Francisco State University, but the letter of recommendation, addresses the admissions committee at UC Berkeley or something like that. that. You don't want that. That sets a really negative impression. So just be careful about that. And then I want to be really clear that if you're applying to San Francisco State University, you can only apply to one program per semester. That's how Cal State Apply is set up, and that's the limit. And that's really, I think, the case across the CSU system. But it is common for students to apply, maybe you submit one application to San Francisco State University, and then you're applying to a similar program at CSU East Bay or Sonoma or wherever it is that you're applying to, right? But yes, it's common for people to use the same letter of recommendation writer, but just make sure that they tailor the letter to, slightly adapt, that portion of the letter to the program that you're applying to. All right, Violet. Oh, sorry, Tanya, you had a second question.
Yes. So where could I find the recording for this session that just happened?
It won't be available till tomorrow. And if you would like to access that, you can fill out the workshop materials request form. I'm going to go ahead and put that link in the chat again.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. And this goes for everybody, just to repeat, I will be sending out a copy of the recording, the PowerPoint, and the supplemental materials in an email tomorrow to anybody that signs up for the workshop materials request. I went ahead and put the link back in the chat. Violet, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for holding this today. And I apologize for my question being a bit disjointed in the chat.
No, that's okay. Okay. Can you give a little bit more insight or context?
Absolutely. I'm a 49-year-old lawyer who wants to be a high school teacher, and I don't have any teaching experience. I'm applying to the Graduate School of Education for a master's and credential. And I don't have any teachers that I've worked with that I can use as references. So I'm going to be using former bosses. And I just wanted your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, excuse me. I've been in meetings all morning. I had to get some water. All right, so yes, you absolutely can use former bosses. That is a preferred letter of recommendation writer. If you don't have teaching experience, you might want to consider trying to see if there's opportunities to gain volunteer experience. A lot of school districts are always seeking that. And that would also kind of support your commitment to the field. I don't know your backstory. I don't know how your experience in law relates to education specifically for you. But that might be another strategy that you might want to consider. But yes, absolutely, you can certainly use former bosses as letter of recommendation writers. You're welcome. Azine, what is your question?
Hello, thank you so much for this great session. Is it possible for us, for example, we had an application form on the website, and after a while we decided to change it and have some edits on it. Is it possible for us?
I'm going to repeat what I think I'm understanding your question to be. Please clarify if I am not correct. So did you already pay and submit your application and pay the application fee in Cal State Apply, and now you want to make an edit to your application?
I'm wondering if somewhere I have some problems or I want to add something else after a while. For example, first of all, I applied for some of my letters, but I don't have my language score certificate yet. And can I apply it after the application form?
After you submitted your application? Yeah, I mean, if it's the case where you don't, is this like a TOEFL or an IELTS that you're asking about?
IELTS, yeah.
Okay, it's a little off topic from our session today, but yeah, you can, what will happen is that your application will be considered incomplete and our reviewers won't be able to review your application if it's required, meaning if you got your bachelor's degree outside the United States. And so our office will be in touch with you to submit that anyway. All right, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and Sandra, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, so I just had a question about, maybe you talked about this already, but I've been hearing mixed things about who is supposed to write the letter of recommendation. I've been hearing that the student or person applying is supposed to be writing the letter of recommendation, and then you just kind of send that to your professor, whoever, and they kind of just add little things in. Is that correct? Or I thought the actual professor is supposed to write it, so I'm just a little confused about who's supposed to write it.
You know, traditionally what's supposed to happen is the professor or supervisor should be the one writing the letter. But some professors get bombarded with some of these requests, and I have heard cases, you know, where faculty might ask the student to write it and then they sign off on it. In that case, you might want to see if there's another option. Someone who's really going to be able to devote that energy to writing that letter for you. Or you could work with that instructor to share with them that the electronic portfolio materials that I shared earlier. And that could maybe help get over the hurdle of what to get started with, or like how to go about this, right? So that's a conversation you'll have to have with them one-on-one, and you'll have to look at what your options are for a letter of recommendation.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sure. Elias, you have your hand raised.
Hi, thank you, Sarah, for holding this workshop. My question is, I haven't been in school for 5 years now, and my letters of rec, I need 3, and I was thinking of using my supervisor and managers. Will I be docked if I don't have a teacher or a professor writing one of my letters?
That depends on the program you're applying to. So in most, you know, with most programs, if they have a preference, they usually will say so on their admissions webpage. I have seen, you know, some programs specifically say that they prefer at least one of your letters to be from an academic professor, or at least one of your letters be from a supervisor. If they don't specify, you can always reach out to the graduate coordinator for your program and see if they have a preference. And if not, then you should feel free to move forward with all supervisors. That's not uncommon, especially for students who have been out of the academic circle for a few years, right? You know, maybe you've gotten some preliminary experience, you want to go back to grad school, either to make a change or to advance your career, or, you know, maybe to get back in the academic environment, depending on your goals. The other thing that you might want to consider too is if your academics were, you know, maybe your overall grades were kind of mediocre, but maybe you did really well in courses that were related to the program you're applying to. You know, sometimes having an academic reference can help bolster confidence with the admissions committee that you can be successful at the graduate level where the rigor is greater. So those are some things to kind of think about. But generally speaking, it really boils down to what does that program prefer, and that it will vary by program. All right, Joseph,
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Joseph, let's circle back to you. Your hand's been raised. Joseph, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Hello.
Hi there.
As I said earlier, I am Joseph from Ghana.
Yep.
And in Ghana here, I am a teacher. I have taught in the high school for 4 years. And then I have also gone to read MSc in nutrition and dietetics, for which I want to also read PhD nutrition and dietetics. But with this, I did the course through distance learning, and I had distinction. I had first class, that is distinction. And in Ghana here, they say that if you want to apply to reading PhD, if you read MSc, you have to go and read MPhil, Master of Philosophy, before you can read your PhD. Is it also applied in America as Ghanaians' method or Ghanaian philosophy?
I'm not totally sure I understand the question. You're trying to let me rephrase. So you want to get a PhD in philosophy, and you're wondering, do you need a master's degree first?
No, I have read masters in nutrition and dietetics. I read MSc nutrition and dietetics. But in Ghana, they say that if you want to read PhD, unless you have MPhil, unless you have MPhil.
I don't know what MPhil,
Master
what
of
do you mean by,
Philosophy.
what is MPhil? I don't know what that is.
Master of Philosophy.
Oh, okay. So that you, okay. So you're talking about nutrition and dietetics. I think I'm still trying to understand the question. Please bear with me. So are you trying to figure out if you need a master's degree to work in nutrition and dietetics in the United States?
No, my question is, I want to read PhD. I have read nutrition and dietetics, and then I'll complete in November or February 2022. And I want to read PhD. My goal is to read PhD. I don't want to repeat masters again.
I see.
have read
Oh, and so
MSc, 2
I
years.
see. So you're wondering if your degree is equivalent to a master's here in the US?
That is it.
Okay. This may be not the appropriate workshop for that, but you can have your credentials evaluated through an evaluation service prior to applying. WES is a really common one, and that would clarify, how that degree would relate. What I would suggest that you do, just for the purposes of keeping the topic on, keeping the questions related to personal statements and letters of recommendation, you can send me an email at gradadv@sfsu.edu, and I can follow up with you individually. Okay, Michael, your hand is raised. Go ahead and ask your question. Michael, you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Oh, you said the letter of recommendation can be teacher, counselor. Is there anything else?
Ideally, faculty or supervisors. You could ask an academic counselor, but typically faculty or supervisors are preferred letter of recommendation writers. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. If I don't see any additional hands raised, I'm going to go ahead and transition to questions in the chat. Please bear with me a moment. It's possible some of you have asked these with your hands raised. I'll do my best here. Do you have any advice for applicants with low GPAs or a degree in a different major or field of study? Great question. So, if you have the GPA piece, let's start with that piece. So if your GPA is low, depending on how low, you might need to take additional classes after you've earned your bachelor's degree to raise your GPA to meet the most recent, to ensure that your most recent 60 semester or 90 quarter units of study reaches that 3.0. And that is a great opportunity if you're taking additional classes to build relationships with those faculty members. Go to office hours, introduce yourself, share with them what your goals are, and set the stage for them to write you a letter of recommendation. This is also a great time for you to take any prerequisite courses while you're raising your GPA. So that would be a fantastic strategy. And this is also a great strategy if you're switching from an unrelated undergrad, right? So maybe you decided later on that you want to pursue business, but maybe all of your undergraduate courses were, more related. Maybe you were a kinesiology, undergrad. Well, if you were, going to take some additional classes to just kind of get your toes wet, build a foundation, make sure that this is the right field, or if you're doing that to meet GPA requirements, it's a great opportunity to help kind of make that transition and to get letters of recommendation from faculty that are related. This is also a fantastic strategy if you've not been in class, been in school for a long time. A lot of times I meet students that have been out of school for 20, 30 years. And, that there's apprehension about coming back to school. Sometimes just taking a class or two can kind of overcome that hurdle, get yourself reacquainted with the academic environment, set the stage for a letter of recommendation along the way too. All right, so I think I answered a couple of those questions here. There's a question that I got about whether the GRE will be waived. That is a question for your academic department. You can always reach out to the graduate coordinator for your program. You can also send your, or also check out the admissions webpage for your program. But if you're not sure if your department has not clarified if the GRE is required for the upcoming admission cycle, you can certainly send an email to the graduate coordinator for your program. I went ahead and put that link back in the chat. Okay. There's a question in here. I am applying to the pre-health post-baccalaureate program. Since graduating, I've been working in biotech industry for 6 years. I don't have volunteer or clinical experience, but I've had a couple of life experiences that have led me towards pursuing medicine. I'm a bit hesitant to highlight this negative aspect of my resume. Should I just focus on highlighting my experiences instead and not directly address my lack of experience? There's a lot of different reasons why people will pursue the pre-health post-bac. So, and then actually, they have two tracks. They have one track for folks that are looking to enhance their academics, meaning maybe they took those classes earlier, but they didn't earn very good grades. But they also have another track called the career changer track. And that might be the appropriate path for you. Maybe you just haven't, maybe you studied something else or you haven't had a lot of experience yet. So it's not totally uncommon for folks to not have that experience, but the important piece is regardless of what program you're applying to, try to highlight what you do have that's relevant. And if you have time before the deadline, you can always try to accrue experience now, right? It would help to show your commitment to the profession. But those are some general best practices there. Okay, I think there's another question in the chat. I had a low GPA and have taken additional classes. How do you know how much your GPA has been raised? I would say send me an email at gradadv@sfsu.edu. Again, that's I can go into more detail in a one-on-one with you on that. Okay, I have a hand raised here from, please correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, Soundaria. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, sir. Hi, sir. I'm sorry about that. I'm joining from a different account. My name is Shailendra. However, I'll get on with my question. So I come with 10 plus years of work experience as a communication trainer. And so my statement of purpose and personal statement are way too long, more than 1,500 words, close to 2,000 actually. And I find it tough to trim it down to say 500 or 750. So is that okay?
No, are you applying to a business program out of curiosity?
No, I'm applying for a master's in communication.
Communications? And
yes.
The personal statement, did they say that they want your essay to be 500 to 750 words?
That's correct, yes.
Then that's what it should be. Whatever the department says is what you should do. So just to give everybody a little bit of an idea of how your application is reviewed. First, once you hit submit and you pay the application fee and Cal State Apply, your application is first going to be reviewed by the Division of Graduate Studies, that's this office, and they are reviewing your application for minimum admission requirements, meaning, do you meet the GPA requirement of a 3.0 for admission? Did you graduate with a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution? Did you leave all of your institutions in good standing? And for students that got their bachelor's degree outside the US, do you have a passing English language test score? And if all of that looks good, then your application is sent to your academic department for review. That's going to be business, communications, kinesiology, counseling, whatever program that you're applying to. And that's where they're going to take a deeper dive to look at your fit and preparedness for admission to that program, which includes your personal statement. So they set the rules for your personal statement. So whatever they're saying, that's what you should do. All right, Joseph, you have your hand raised.
Oh, sorry, please. I was muted.
Sure, go ahead.
Muting myself. Yeah. I'm sorry if I've been asking questions. This is my first time of being on this platform, so.
Oh, well, welcome. We're glad to have you.
As I said earlier, I'm from Ghana, and then everything I'm going to say is from Ghana to US. That is where I want to further my education. And please, I have been trying to figure out on the IELTS because Ghana here, from childhood, from basic, from nursery to university, ours is English throughout. And then there is one of the requirements that you have to provide the IELTS or GRE um, what do you call tests before you are given admission to US. But here, Ghana, here, um, everything is about English from nursery to university. So do you also consider that if the person is coming from an first English speaking country, do you accept the student without IELTS?
If your language of instruction was not in English, you are required, even if English is a dominant language in your country. It is a requirement. It is not based on citizenship. So even US citizens, if they get their bachelor's degree in another country where the instruction was not in English, they are required to take and submit one of these English language test exams. So I hope that clarifies. I went ahead and put the website in the chat where you can find more information on that. Joseph, I'm going to move on to questions that are more specific to personal statements and letters of recommendation. If you have additional questions, Joseph, you're certainly welcome to send me an email at gradadv@sfsu.edu, and we can continue the conversation there. Okay. Are there any additional questions from the group? A thumbs up, great. Are there any additional questions from the group? We are over time and I want to be respectful of people's time here. Specific to letters of recommendation or personal statements that I can answer. You can either raise your hand or pop that in the chat.
Oh.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the risk of, like, we were talking about someone who like doesn't respond and then you need to ask someone else, like how that would work to make sure that we have enough time to ask someone else without it being, I don't know if you have any like backup plans or how you think about that.
I mean, ideally, you know, here's the thing. Most people who are going to commit to writing a letter of recommendation usually want to do a good job. It's pretty rare that people will agree to do that and not make an effort to at least try to write a strong letter for you. I think it's really more just about keeping this on their radar. So send them a gentle reminder, maybe 2 weeks before you'd like them to submit the letter. And what I would just say is, thank you so much for writing that letter of recommendation for me. As a reminder, the deadline is, and then give them the date and ask them if, let them know if you have any questions or needs any support, please don't hesitate to let me know. Here's how you can reach me. And just make yourself available. And a lot of times that alone can really set yourself up for them to send a successful letter. If you're hesitant or if you feel at all that they wouldn't follow up, then you might want to consider whether you should ask them in the first place, though. But generally speaking, I think it's really just about politely keeping it on their radar, because this is the kind of task that is really easy for people to just, push off until it has to be addressed, right? So that would be my advice there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Do we have any other questions on letters of recommendation or personal statements? Okay, there's one in the chat. It says, hi, my recommendation letters. If my current supervisor moved to a different company, can I still ask them? Yes. So if you have a supervisor and they change jobs, this happens a lot. Absolutely. But just make sure that in their letter of recommendation, they clarify how they know you and in what context. So, they were your supervisor from a position, at whatever company, right? And that how long did they supervise you for? So just make sure that that's clarified in the letter. Does faculty mean teacher? Yes. So those terms I do use those terms interchangeably. It also is the same thing as instructor. So yes, Michael, faculty does mean the same thing as teacher. There's another question in the chat. Would it be okay to ask 2 people from the same company, or should I get people from different places? You can ask 2 people from the same company, provided that they know you well, view you positively, and preferably that they have a supervisory or an evaluative relationship to you. Great question. If there are more questions, please feel free to raise your hand or pop it in the chat. think we're starting to wind down here. I'll wait just a couple more seconds if there are any more questions. While I wait, I'm going to go ahead and find that link again for the workshop materials request form and share that in the chat. So if anybody has not yet completed that form, I recommend that you take this time now to fill that out. I will be sending out the materials by the end of the workday tomorrow. How long should a person know you before they recommend you? That is a good question. So that could be, you know, that it's gonna differ for every student, but it's okay if you've only been in a, if this is a faculty person, like a teacher, if you've only taken courses with them for a single semester, that's okay. So provided that they can write a strong letter and speak to your academic ability to be successful. If it's a supervisor, you know, it depends on the context, right? So if you were in a limited term internship that was a 6-month internship, you know, that makes sense. The longer someone knows you, the more detail they can go into it. So longer is usually nicer, but that's not going to be available for every student. So you have to just kind of look at each scenario and evaluate it that way. And if you have questions or you want to talk that out in a one-on-one scenario, I would encourage you to send me an email and we can review that together at gradadv@sfsu.edu. Andrea, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I'm kind of blanking out as to what I was going to say. I'm sorry, I'm going to try to remember it. I was listening to what you said and then I completely forgot it. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. While I wait, there's another question in the chat. Is it okay to ask a supervisor who you also have a personal relationship with? Oh, that's a good question. If it's provided that they can write the letter from a professional perspective and that they can really evaluate you objectively from a professional standpoint, I don't see why you couldn't. But be really clear with them when you ask them, you know, do not talk about me as a friend. This really needs to come from the place of you being my supervisor, and it should be an honest evaluation. If you have any hesitancy, if that's something that they can manage, then, you know, evaluate whether it makes sense to have them write the letter. But yeah, I think that would be okay. Andrea, do you recall your question out of curiosity?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. So my question was, I had my transcripts evaluated by Wes, and then I know the requirement is to send in all transcripts from all schools. So my question was, from my Wes evaluation, I have, I think, 2 classes that were accredited to my previous university before graduating, and it's from a different institution. Did I need to then ask that prior institution for those transcripts? Because I've tried to do that before in the past and they told me that they don't have those transcripts anymore.
No, once you submit your transcripts to an institution, typically they become the property of that institution. So you can, our office will accept, I'll put this, let me find the link here. We do accept WES evaluations in lieu of your country-specific academic documents. This admission criteria by country page, you can find out more information on that. I went ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, Lishal, go ahead and ask your question.
Hello. So I know that you said first it gets sent to you guys and you guys review like the basic requirements. So if we did not leave good standing on a school that we had went to for a semester or 2, but we did leave in good standing at the school that we graduated from, does that make a difference?
I believe, if I understand correctly, I think that your students are supposed to be in good standing at all institutions attended. You can always feel free to, if you would like just a further clarity, you can send me an email at gradadv@sfsu.edu. Yes, there's a question in the chat. Can we leave now? Yes, you can leave at any time. I'm just, as a courtesy, staying after to answer any additional questions. But yes, Michael, if you don't have any additional questions, you can certainly feel free to leave. You're not required to stay during the Q&A. I do need to prepare for another meeting. I only have maybe a couple more minutes. Are there any final questions specifically about letters of recommendation or personal statements that I can answer? Okay, all right. Joseph, what's your final question here?
Please, my final question is, I asked a question in the box, but my network was unstable as it is usual in Ghana. I asked that some of us, when we were in school, though we attained first class with distinction, but one thing is that we were not so much in contact with the lecturers and the supervisors. So are they to recommend us for recommending sake to fill a space, or they are to write something specifically about us? Because as for us, when we were in school, we were just learning and learning and learning, but we didn't have a lot of contact with the lecturers or supervisors for them to know as well as recommendation letter requires. So how do they recommend us?
What I would say is, as I reviewed earlier in the workshop, that would be a great use of the electronic portfolio, because then it helps to fill in those gaps, right? So if you haven't, whether it's an educational difference because you got your degree in Ghana, or that's been your educational experience, or there's cultural differences there and how those relationships form, the beauty of having that electronic portfolio is that it really sets the stage for them to write a detailed letter about you. And if you can try to coordinate time to meet with them where you can ask questions, or they can ask questions, that would be really helpful. With that, I do need to end, Joseph, I'm sorry, I do need to end the workshop. We are well over time at this point. I want to thank you all for coming. As a friendly reminder, if you have not yet submitted your information to the workshop materials request form, I'm going to add that again to the chat. Please click that link and fill that out before the end of the day tomorrow. And I will be happy to share all of the materials from today, which will include the transcript. I'm sorry, there was a question about that. Yes, I'll share like the audio transcript. I'll share the recording of the session. I will also share the copy of the PowerPoint and some supplemental handouts that will help you along the way. Thank you all so much for coming. You guys have been a great group. I look forward to hearing more from each of you, and I wish you luck with your applications. Have a great afternoon.